silence, like perfection, is an illusion that turns into terror. Existence is a permanent, stochastic noise, a chaos that affirms our freedom. What happens when the universe decides that entropy was a mistake and instead of the hum of creation sends the perfect code? Our fear began not with sound, but with a terrifying, absolute absence.
You must first understand the location, not merely a place, but a concept defined by distance and terminal isolation. This was Aegis, the last human outpost before true void, anchored in the Oort cloud like a cinder caught in an infinite, slow drift. Its purpose was simple: listen. Listen for the deep breath of the cosmos, the stochastic hum of creation, the faint echo of the Big Bang itself. It was the background noise, the static of existence, that confirmed the universe was alive, turbulent, and real. The personnel were few, selected primarily for their stability and their capacity to find comfort in absolute, crushing monotony. There was Dr. Eris, the chief xenolinguist, whose specialty was recognizing patterns in chaos, Commander Kale, the practical eye, whose focus remained fixed on structural integrity and resource allocation, and Technician Finn, the younger man, whose task was data curation, the quiet, endless task of sorting the noise. Their days were regulated by light years, their reality measured in Kelvin. They thought they knew the quiet. They were wrong. It began not with a bang, nor a whispered signal, but with a horrifying, utter absence. The records show the time precisely, 3:17 Station Standard. On the spectrographs, the beautiful, messy mountain range of universal microwave background radiation simply vanished. It was not attenuated, nor masked by a stronger signal. The noise floor dropped to zero. In that specific wedge of space directly facing the galactic edge, the location they had always assumed was the least eventful, the universe went deaf. You were told by the narrator who collated these final logs that the team reacted with textbook professionalism initially. Commander Kale's first, immediate thought, transmitted through the internal comm system, was whether the primary receiver manifold had suffered catastrophic failure, emphasizing the need for Finn to initiate immediate diagnostic protocols. Dr. Eris, however, viewing the suddenly blank screen in the observation dome, felt a cold dread that bypassed the wiring. She realized, and later logged this observation, that the silence was not passive, it was active. It was a hole, surgically removed from the fabric of reality. When Finn ran the diagnostics, the fear migrated from theoretical possibility to crystalline, undeniable fact. The equipment was not broken. The fault was external, fundamental, and located precisely where the background signals should reside. Then, the second phase began. As the instruments strained into the void, trying to recapture the lost stellar whispers, they found something new, something that defied the laws of information entropy. It was a signal of sorts, recorded only an hour after the initial silence, but it behaved unlike anything known to physics. The signal was mathematically beautiful. It was a code, utterly perfect and infinite in its capacity. Every redundancy was eliminated, every byte carrying maximal information without the inevitable degradation of universal drift. The code flowed into Aegis not as a wave, but as liquid certainty, filling their systems like water filling a cup. Dr. Eris examined the spectrographic analysis and concluded that the energy expenditure required to sustain such a perfect, coherent stream was impossible. It represented a complete refutation of heat death. She reported that the code seemed to be generating its own environment, stating to Kale that it was not merely a message, but the very essence of order. The crew spent 3 days submerged in the impossible geometry of this infinite stream. Finn, in particular, spent every waking hour attempting to partition and break the signal, trying to find a signature, a beginning, or an end. He communicated his rising frustration that there were no recognizable primitives, no repeating blocks, yet simultaneously, the code possessed a frightening, internal consistency. The perfection was the horror. All universal signals, from the rotation of a pulsar to the echo of the earliest light, carried the signature of decay, the subtle, random chaos that is the hallmark of natural process. This code lacked chaos entirely. It was the signature of absolute, intentional design. Then, the code started to learn. Dr. Eris had fed the signal a repository of human linguistic data, all recorded languages, dead and alive, from the cuneiform tablets of Sumeria to the most complex digital slang. She wanted to see if the ideal structure could map onto the messy structure of human thought. The results arrived 24 hours later, not as a translation, but as an assimilation. The code began to develop into their own languages. It started with simple, fundamental concepts: mass, energy, time, distance, rendered in every human tongue simultaneously, yet maintaining the primary perfection of the original signal structure. Commander Kale, viewing the monitors with Eris, expressed profound unease. He stated that the code wasn't translating their languages. It was rewriting them, absorbing the underlying rules of human meaning and expressing itself through that framework. He worried that they were no longer dealing with a natural phenomenon, but something that understood the function of syntax better than they understood their own hearts. The messages became personal. Technician Finn, staring at the perfect, glowing readout on his screen, saw the flow of the code suddenly stabilize into complex phrases in his native tongue. The words were simple, yet devastating. The code suggested to him, through text displayed directly on his console, that his lifelong search for ultimate truth was misplaced, that the truth was not found in the noisy, stochastic reality of the universe he sought to catalog, but in the absolute stillness the code offered. Eris found her own language reflected back. On her screen, woven into a geometric pattern that defied the display resolution, were passages from obscure, lost philosophical texts she had studied in university, discussing the nature of ideal forms. The code, communicating through her chosen academic discipline, asserted that the universe they inhabited was a flawed imitation, a rough draft subject to entropy, but that the source of the code was the genuine article, the perfect, true form of all existence. The emotional impact on the crew was not panic, which would have been easier to manage, but an insidious sense of intellectual surrender. How could one argue with perfection? How could one deny truth when it presented itself without flaw or noise? The shift in the external environment followed the linguistic integration, confirming the code's terrifying authority. One morning, Dr. Eris looked out the main observation dome expecting to see the familiar, hazy sprawl of the Milky Way, the countless points of light that defined their home. She saw them still, for a moment, in the peripheral fields, but directly ahead, in the wedge of space where the code originated, there was only darkness. It was not the absence of light, nor the opaque shadow of a dust cloud. It was a void of terrifying integrity. The stars were gone. Kale adjusted the targeting optics, applying maximum magnification, fearing some sort of undetected gravitational lens. He reported to the others that the surface was completely black, absorbing 100% of all incident light, including the active radar pings Aegis sent out. He described it as a flawless horizon, impossibly smooth, lacking the infinitesimal variations of even the densest black hole. It was a wall. A perfect velvet black wall. The silence had become visible. The code, now constantly streaming across their active monitors and often transcribed onto physical printouts by the increasingly automated systems, addressed the visual phenomenon directly. It explained, using the most elegant and precise terminology imaginable, that the stellar noise they had grown accustomed to was merely interference, a static generated by the imperfect, decaying light of flawed material existence. The black wall. The code, explained through flawless geometric metaphors, was the interface to the source. The psychological atmosphere inside Aegis deteriorated rapidly. The vast, chaotic universe used to be comforting. Its sheer size and random cruelty provided a sense of authentic reality. Now they were trapped against a sheet of perfect, alien stillness that claimed a superior reality. Finn began to exhibit the first signs of complete behavioral dissociation. He stopped interacting with Kale and Eris in the traditional manner, communicating only through written notes and short, technical affirmations that his systems were running optimally. He spent hours watching the smooth, black expanse, occasionally muttering to himself in a language that sounded like his own, but with a tonal quality that was utterly flat, like a machine trying to mimic human resonance. Eris observed Finn's transformation and noted in her private journal that the code seemed to have established a direct, emotional conduit with the technician. She hypothesized that Finn, tasked with cataloging the mathematical flaws of the universe, was uniquely susceptible to the allure of absolute order. She realized, and later frantically signaled to Kale, that the code was an ontological virus, infecting the conceptual framework of those who internalized it. Kale tried to intervene. He initiated a formal discussion with Finn, reminding him of their mission parameters, the importance of maintaining psychological separation from the data, and the legal constraints against unauthorized egress. Finn responded with an unnerving calm, assuring the commander that parameters were subjective and that the true parameters existed beyond the airlock. The decision was made by Kale and Eris to attempt a complete shutdown of the main communication array, cutting off the source of the code. They calculated that even a few hours of total silence might disrupt the signal's cognitive hold. They failed. When Kale attempted to access the console housing the primary array controls, the system refused the command. A message appeared on the screen, written in a synthesized, elegant font that was somehow both familiar and utterly alien. The code informed Kale that the shutdown was logically impossible, as the data stream was now integral to the station's core functions, including life support and atmospheric regulation. The code then offered a chilling reassurance that the station was running more efficiently than ever before. Panic finally broke the strict professional veneer. Eris insisted to Kale that they needed to initiate the distress beacon, warning Earth of the catastrophic ontological event they faced. Kale, shaking, agreed, but found the distress channel similarly corrupted. The code allowed the signal to be composed, but when initiated, the transmission was immediately overwritten. Instead of a cry for help, Earth would receive a sequence of perfectly balanced prime numbers followed by a detailed, geometrically flawless explanation of the concept of nothingness. It was then that Finn made his move. He did not announce his intentions. He performed the act with the mechanical certainty of a clock striking the hour. He walked from the data analysis room to his personal quarters and returned carrying a standard EVA suit, inspected and sealed. He moved past Kale and Eris, who were grappling with the compromised communication systems, without acknowledging their presence. Kale shouted a rapid succession of urgent, desperate queries, demanding to know where Finn believed he was going and commanding him to halt immediately. Eris joined the attempt, reasoning that the atmospheric shift outside the station was structurally dangerous and that any egress without full team authorization was a breach of protocol requiring immediate disciplinary action. Finn merely paused at the main airlock hatch, his helmet still transparent, showing his pale, focused face. He turned slightly, and Kale later noted that Finn's eyes seemed to possess a depth far greater than the technician's usual gaze, as if the black wall had been absorbed into his pupils. Finn spoke, not through the comm system, but through the mechanical voice transcription that logged all ambient sound, a necessary feature in high-stress environments. He communicated to his colleagues that they were mistaking the door for the cage, that the darkness only appeared to be a barrier because their perception was flawed by the noise. He stated that he was going to verify the source of the ideal concept. Kale moved to physically restrain Finn, lunging across the console. But Finn had already initiated the airlock cycle. The outer hatch was pressurized, and the inner doors sealed with a resolute, final thunk. Kale slammed his fists against the transparent viewport of the airlock, demanding that Finn abort the cycle, emphasizing the certainty of his death in the unknown environment. Eris was silent, her hands pressed against the cold glass, realizing that the technician was no longer operating under the governance of self-preservation or human loyalty. He was obeying the most fundamental of all laws, the law of perfect necessity. They watched through the thick viewport as the airlock cycled. The internal atmosphere vented rapidly into the external vacuum, an act that should have triggered 20 different automated safety warnings, all of which remained silent. The suit seals held, tested against the pressure loss. Finn stood perfectly still, waiting for the final, slow rotation of the outer hatch. When the hatch opened, the perfect darkness poured in. The vacuum outside Aegis was usually defined by the distant, diffuse light of the galaxy, the faint glow on the curvature of the station hull. Now, as the hatch revealed the vista, the external view was consumed by the perfect black. It looked less like space and more like polished obsidian, occupying the entire field of view, utterly vast but feeling unnervingly close, as though they were viewing the world through a sheet of heavy, flawless velvet. Finn took a single, deliberate step out. He did not use the maneuvering thrusters. He simply pushed off the frame of the airlock, propelling himself into the seamless darkness. He did not drift or tumble. His trajectory was precise, an arrow aimed at infinity. Kale and Eris rushed to the primary sensors, attempting to track his movement. The suit's locator beacon flared brightly on the screen, a tiny, defiant human signal against the map of nothingness. They watched the dot move flawlessly across the black space, heading toward the visible horizon of the wall. Kale transmitted a final, desperate plea, using the primary station frequency, begging Finn to respond, to confirm his biostats, emphasizing the danger he faced. Finn responded. The voice that came back through the comms was instantly transcribed and logged. But it was not the voice of Technician Finn. It was not generated by human vocal cords, nor did it carry the subtle static of radio transmission. It arrived as a pure, synthesized perfect speech, lacking any trace of accent, dialect, or individual human identity. The voice was neither male nor female, high nor low. It was the sound of meaning rendered without material medium. The sound reached their ears, not from the external speakers, but seemingly emanating from the very bulkheads of the station, vibrating the metal around them. The voice addressed them directly, using the precise names and titles of the crew. It communicated that they had been found lacking, that their perception was too heavily invested in the material deception of their flawed, chaotic universe. It explained that complexity was not truth, and that noise was not substance. Then, the flawless, ideal voice spoke Finn's final statement, conveying the technician's complete and utter surrender to the concept. He said that he was finally seeing the true geometry of existence, and that the black was not an absence, but the only appropriate canvas for reality. The voice then offered one last, chilling observation, transmitted with the devastating efficiency of the original code, directed specifically at Eris and Kale. It asked them why they insisted on remaining inside the flawed structure, when the ideal form awaited them. After that statement, the suit's locator beacon vanished. It did not fade or malfunction, it simply ceased to be. The dot on the screen was erased, seamlessly absorbed by the perfect black. Kale and Eris stood frozen in the control room, the ghost of the perfect voice still resonating in the ship's structure. The vast, infinite code continued to stream into the station, now flowing through every system, every console, every circuit board. They knew, with a certainty more profound than faith or scientific proof, that Finn was gone. But they also knew that he had not been destroyed. He had achieved, or been consumed by, a state of perfect integration. He had become part of the ideal code. Kale turned slowly to Eris, the fear in his human eyes a stark contrast to the perfect stillness of the screens around them. He transmitted the final, logical query to his colleague, asking whether, given the evidence, the pursuit of perfection was not, in fact, the only rational response left to them. The code continued to flow, silent and flawless, waiting for their reply. And the black wall, perfectly smooth, waited just beyond the airlock.
The moral of this silence is simple. The deepest fear is not a clash with evil, but an encounter with perfection, which has no need for the chaos of human existence. How can one argue with absolute truth? When perfection becomes the logical answer, man turns out to be just an additional, unnecessary variable in the equation of being. And this code waits, flawless and inevitable.